Welcome to a special episode of Dead Sleep. I'm Nancy Miller, and I'm so excited to have a special guest with me for a deeper dive into the life of famous mystery writer and notorious teenage killer, Anne Perry. This year, 2024, marks a grim anniversary. 70 years since Pauline Parker and her friend Juliette Hume murdered Pauline's mother, Honora Parker. I revisited the Parker-Hulme murder case and the 1994 film directed by Peter Jackson called Heavenly Creatures, based on that case, in the previous two episodes. And for those episodes, I leaned heavily on a book by Joanne Drayton. Joanne Drayton is a New Zealand-based biographer whose book, The Search for Anne Perry, The Hidden Life of a Bestselling Crime Writer, is the only book about the novelist's complicated past that had the active participation of the reclusive and press-averse Anne Perry herself. So I reached out to Joanne Drayton for a special Q&A for the podcast to help us better understand Anne Perry, share insight into why the girls did what they did all those years ago, and how Anne found redemption through her writing. Just a content warning here. There is brief mention of violence, disordered eating, and Peter Jackson's bare feet. So without further ado, here's my interview with Joanne Drayton, the author of The Search for Anne Perry, The Hidden Life of a Bestselling Crime Writer. You published this book in 2012, is that correct?
Yes, in New Zealand, yeah.
Talk to me about when this started for you and how you got her to come on board.
My mother went to high school with Juliette Hume and Pauline Parker. So she was there, and she always encouraged me to seek a more rounded picture. Especially, when I was an adult. I think when I was a child, it was that cautionary tale. Mm-hmm. Particularly for girls, do not have a crush on your best friend, because you may have some urge one day to put a brick in a stocking and go and knock off, I don't want to be flippant, but, it was the cautionary tale of my childhood. But then as I got older and I sort of got to know my mother more as an individual and as a person, it was a story that kind of haunted her. So because in some sense, she did believe there was an injustice done considering the age of those children and considering the fact that it was kind of one of those teenage, oh my God moments where something way beyond what should have happened did. So I think that was her sense. So she brought me up kind of with that cautionary tale. Then she kind of rerouted the whole thing and looked at it as a case of that needed more treatment, really. And then I ended up teaching, when I was doing my PhD, I ended up teaching at Girls High, where the two girls had gone to school.
What? Wait,
my mother.
What?
Yeah, I know.
Okay, so just to get the timeline for listeners, 1954 is the year of the incident. And then you learn about this lore of the cautionary tale of female potential queerness in high school.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you return, when was this? And then you return to teach at that same school?
Okay, well, this is even more spooky. This is really spooky. So I'm trying to support I had young children and a partner, and I was kind of trying to support us all and do my PhD. And I was in the staff room when they were discussing, this is the early 90s, would have been 92, 93, when they were discussing whether they would lend the school uniforms to Peter Jackson for the movie Heavenly Creatures. And I didn't know what was going to happen. I had no idea. He was a splatter director, splatter movie director.
Yeah.
It was so I had no idea. And I thought to myself, my God, they're so uptight.
Because Peter Jackson says in interviews that they pretended basically the girls didn't exist and that they seemed to be very reluctant to participate. So was that your impression when you were sitting in these meetings and eavesdropping on the elders?
It certainly was. I mean, they really, there was a deep, deep shame. A shame so bad that they had plastered over it, and the last thing they wanted it was for that kind of Band-Aid to be ripped off, and the whole wound exposed again. I think for themselves, but perhaps also for the girls, for the adult Juliet Hume, for the adult Pauline Parker, who had at that stage were released from prison with new identities. But so then, okay, it gets spookier and spookier. So my partner and I were in town in Christchurch City, and we were living at the time. And there was this billboard up there for Heavenly Creatures. And I said to my partner, should we go and watch that, Like it was on the spur of the moment. We get in there and this guy lopes out with bare feet. This is Sir Peter Jackson to introduce his movie. And I looked at him, I thought, God, he's a bit scruffy for a director. And where's his shoes? I'm pretty sure he had bare feet. Well, anyway, very casual. And then this amazing movie just lit up, and there was screaming, and there was blood, and there's the handheld camera, and there's a rushing through the park sort of undergrowth, and it was horrific. But I mean, I came out of that movie thinking, wow, this guy's really got something here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And when he introduced the movie, did he say, here's a little film about a case that you might know? I mean, the case was so famous in New Zealand. Do you remember what his tee up was?
Well, it was pretty humble, because he's a very humble, I don't know. He doesn't push himself. So it was actually a lot more low key than the movie was. I felt like he undersold it, but we'd already bought the ticket, so he didn't need to worry about it,
So there are a lot of people who have tried to tell the story of Juliet Hume and Pauline Parker. There are many people who have tried to tell the story of Anne Perry, and they failed.
What happened, I guess, was I was naive and a dreamer. I was I was naive. I blundered into it, ignorant, with full ignorance on the high beam. And I think had I been more acutely aware of the issues, I probably would have tossed it away. And they did actually. I approached her, saying I would grow her up. I would mature her story. Right. I would move beyond the 15-year-old and look at someone who had lived an extraordinary life and made a remarkable contribution in her field, but also in her faith. So I offered that, but no, they sent me that. My name is Jo. They sent me the Dear John letter. It's almost right. Don't call us, we'll call you.
Yeah, sure. And this was in the early 2000s, or?
This was actually 2009.
Okay.
Yeah, 2009. So they turned me down flatly. And I went to make a documentary in London. And on the long-haul flight back, I was sitting there with those, like you get the free mask.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat up. And I kind of sat up there in that long-haul flight, and I thought, I could do this. I don't need Anne Perry. There's enough of her in the public domain to write a great story.
Yeah.
And I've got all that inside stuff and I know people, so I can do this. Well, I wrote a proposal. I sent it into HarperCollins, and ultimately, a couple of months later, they accepted it. They accepted it, and then I couldn't do any more. It was really weird. I couldn't even research, because in some deep intrinsic kind of way, I felt it was too much when the person was still alive.
Yes.
To tell their story, their intimate, personal story.
Yes.
Without their participation. I had the contract, which is so precious in publishing, as you know,
Yeah.
hard to get, really hard to sell. I had the contract, but I didn't have any peace of mind because I didn't have the buy-in. And my partner actually said to me, look, write to them. I wrote this letter and it said, like, you may feel this is a case of what part of no don't you understand? I told them about the contract and that I was going to do it anyway. It was a bit of a bluff because I was kind of lost. And I got an immediate reply the next, I went to bed. The next morning I woke up, there's the reply. Well, you must have given them a proposal. Can you send us the proposal? I sold it on the murder, obviously, but really what I was trying to do was write an exploration of the psychology of a woman who commits the most ultimate crime and then finds a kind of redemption through writing.
Anne Perry has over 100 books. She was a machine.
Yeah, she was.
Because I think a lot of people were surprised. Why would someone who had committed murder, part of the appeal of her story was that, and then she now writes murder mysteries. You're saying that that's exactly right. Like she kept exploring this idea of the whodunit and why.
Yeah.
That you
did
over 100 and something times in 26 million copies. Talk about not taking no for an answer.
Yeah, really. I think she recognized something in me. Really what she wanted was someone to give some credence, dignity, and attention to her writing. And, she recognized that there were two parts to her life. She didn't see it like that, but she recognized that the world did. She saw herself as one person, not in two parts, but one person, one continuous person. And she wanted desperately for that person to grow up, that story to grow up, from teen killer to successful New York Times writer and author. So I think the allure of offering that was what really brought her on board. Anne Perry deserved more than just what she did when she was 15. She actually had a psychologically fascinating story. She was deeply interesting to deal with and to talk to. And in a way, the way that I've worked has always been to uncover stories about people that would have been lost, that didn't deserve to be lost, that kind of needed attention. Yeah. And I mean, that's kind of been the energy behind what I've done.
Did she ever end up seeing?
No. But I think she didn't. I think she found it very hard to forgive Peter Jackson because it blew her life apart. She said to me, she always thought, I wonder if these people like me because they believe that I'm an author and a Mormon and a devout Christian, blah, 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 whatever. I wonder how they'd feel about me if they knew that I had killed someone. She said to me, I can even love that person, not the killer, but the teenager. If she couldn't love herself, then she couldn't really move on in life and be successful. So to some extent, she had to make peace with that teenager and see it as an evolution. Marjorie Allingham, the crime writer, classic crime writer, said there's something deeply healthy in the implication that to deprive a human being of his life is not not only the most dreadful thing one can do to him, but also that it matters to the rest of us.
Wow.
And I think, it continued to matter to her. It continued to be a story that she needed to revisit in many different ways.
How did you get a story from her that gave you something more?
And one of the things that I did was just not actually ask any direct questions much. I had questions, I had, but they were mostly logistical questions like when did you move here? What did you do? What job? Blah, blah, blah. And then I would chat on and she would come to it and she would talk about it. And it was like she would move into it and talk about the murder, talk about prison, talk about Pauline sometimes, and then she'd shut the door again. And so I had to wait for those moments. And really, we clicked. We did get on.
You've now spent so much time with Anne putting the book together.
Yeah.
How would you describe the relationship between Juliet and Pauline?
I think it was a teenage crush. It may not have had a physical dimension, but I think it was a homosocial crush between two girls that was incredibly intense because of the circumstances. It became folie à deux, madness of two.
Yeah.
Does fit. I mean, it's not necessarily a defense, but it's a description of what happened. And they became caught up in a scenario that Pauline framed and, basically planned for quite some time before she presented it to Anne. And
right.
Anne definitely felt on the back foot that she owed Pauline, because Pauline had been her only stalwart friend and almost family member when her parents, took off overseas when she was in the sanatorium with tuberculosis, potentially dying, and they took off on a sabbatical. So Pauline was her stay, her security, her in a way, a love. Pauline was bulimic, definitely. She was very bright. Both of them were, but very, very bright, and in a very choked up, anal society where very classist, very sexist, and she was on what we end up saying, a wrong side of the tracks. She was frustrated by a life that seemed to be going nowhere. And it appeared to her that her mother was the thing that stood in her way.
Both in Peter Jackson's film and in your book, you get the sense that Pauline was also judged and rejected by her mother. So it's not just a conflict. It's like a mother who's constantly rejecting her identity and shaming her and then making it her fault.
But what happened to Pauline was she had this carrot dangled in front of it, this capacity to escape with Anne, with Juliet Hume.
Yeah. And Juliet's parents kind of like humored her.
Oh, yeah, they did. They definitely did.
I would love to hear your impression the first day you meet Anne Perry.
She was, I was very nervous. I was meeting at her agent's office, and you climb up these stairs, and she sat there looking quite formidable, but really rather gorgeous as well. So she was beautifully dressed, immaculate hair, lovely, I think it was a black and white outfit suit. And normally I can talk to the back end of a bus, but I remember floundering and sort of trying to be coherent. And I said, would you mind if I visited Parker-Hulme, like where she lived? Would you mind if I won't, I just want to see the place so I know what I'm writing about if we go ahead with this. And she said, look, come and talk to me. She said, don't just visit the village. Come in. I'm happy to talk to you. So we arranged we talked for about 8 hours for 3 solid days. And then I went back in winter.
And what kind of relationship ensued after you write the book, you publish it? Did you stay in touch? Are you Anne Perry's biographer? Was it that official?
It wasn't authorized by the subject.
Right.
They didn't do that.
Right.
And they didn't read it.
I'm very surprised.
Yeah. They trusted me, I think.
Yeah.
And the fact is, so much damage had been done to her. They didn't really think I could do much more than had already happened. But it was biographer, subject, not friend. Okay, we clicked, but that doesn't mean you're best buddies and best friend forever.
There are other writers, other books, one in particular, that presents a less charitable view of both Pauline and Juliet, and then ultimately of Anne Perry, because she was the more public figure. And that less charitable view is that they were exactly what the courts said they were, which was two sociopathic narcissists or narcissistic sociopaths who got off easy and were not remorseful. What are your thoughts on that?
I hadn't really thought about. I don't agree with that reading of either Pauline or Juliet. They are both devout, by chance Christian women. They have gone on to give back to the world and the community and try and make a way forward that has dignity and respect that they obviously did not show their victim. What is really interesting is they have not pursued really meaningful relationships with either the same sex or opposite sex, because really, in a way, they never developed that ultimate trust and that belief and that capacity to have a long-term life partner.
Anne Perry passed away in 2023, in April of 2023, which means you now really are the keeper of Anne Perry's life. You now are the living person who knows more about her than anyone else.
Yeah.
Do you have any future plans, or what are your plans with her legacy?
It would be interesting to revisit a more comprehensive picture of Anne Perry filmically. So documentary style, it would be interesting. I respect her legacy. I respect her as a person. And I ended up liking her as a person. And her story will live on. And because it is a story, I believe it is a story of redemption, of how you can go from zero, minus zero, to sort of hero, and tell stories that move and inspire people. And so I think that will live on, and I hope it does. And I think it needs to be recorded in more complete and inclusive and comprehensive ways. And that would be good to see. I hope someone does that.
Well, you've done an extraordinary job in your book, and thank you so much, Joanne Drayton, for joining me on the podcast. It's been such a fascinating conversation.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks again to Joanne Drayton, and thank you for listening to the latest episode of this Dead Sleep Deep Dive. Don't forget to rate, follow, and subscribe to the show. I'll be back next week with a new true crime for bedtime story. Until then, nighty-night.